You've summed up the correct point of view. I might go further, and this is not to apologize, but the truth is that the world is politicized, and I would argue that the political process is corrupt. Let's suppose you're anti-war. What nation in the world has the largest defense budget, larger than the next 11 countries combined? What nation defends itself in 100 foreign countries, which is to say deploys troops in 100 foreign countries? When people talk about environmental destruction, and they talk about, as an example, carbon generation, in the United States, we prefer to set carbon quotas on a nation per nation basis. In smaller countries, they prefer to do it on a per capita basis. So by that standard, the countries with the best so-called emissions records have the worst emissions records if you base it on a per capita. Of course, emerging countries with regards to environmental degradation would suggest with regards to carbon that since 90-something% of the carbon loadings are historic, that the countries that have contributed to those historic loads are the countries that should bear the brunt of environmental restoration. The point is simply that the government that is potentially the most destructive to you and your values is the government closest to you. It is odd that, and I'm just going to say it, Andy, people like you and I fear corruption, but we don't seem to fear corruption when it occurs in English, according to the rule of law, enforced by the legislature, by white people. We fear corruption that we understand less, with different skin pigments. What is the difference, really, qualitatively, between a campaign contribution and a bribe? I would suggest that one is sanctioned by law, and the other is sanctioned by process. So while I understand the nature of the questioner's concerns, I would suspect that the questioner would be better off looking at the sins of one's own regime as opposed to externalizing blame. I also believe that engagement is a very good thing. I believe, irrespective of how the United States gets along with the Chinese or the Iranians or the Russians or anybody, that we're better off talking than shooting. And I certainly believe that, as an example, my small engagement in Congo or South Sudan or Cambodia or Uzbekistan, all the questionable places that I have invested in, has probably been a larger contributor to peace and stability in those regions than my absence would have been. I understand, as an example, that a group of us made a discovery in Syria, which we mercifully sold to the Indians, and then it was taken over by ISIS. And a lot of that money went to a bad cause. One needs to decide whether you are wholly conversant and wholly comfortable as to what happens to the taxes that you pay in your own country. How does that further world peace? Does it further world peace, or does it in fact further instability?
You gave a speech, and it was really one of the best speeches of the year. I didn't know it at the time, but just upon reflection, is about that the time is now for natural resource stocks and to be an investor. And it's right now. And that was in January. And boy, have we had a year, regardless of the various fluctuations within the markets. Where are we at now? And then, yeah, give me your thoughts.
Depends on who you are. If you're a contrarian trader who followed one part of my speech, which is to say that things are hated when they're cheap, the time has come to sell. If you owned a basket of small uranium stocks because people hated them, people don't hate them anymore. They've doubled, in some cases tripled. The hate's gone, sell the stock. If you're a long-term investor, there's lots and lots and lots of running room. It wouldn't surprise me if this market needed a rest when the junior market says they're undercapitalized and where I get cut back in every financing I try to participate in. The fact that high-profile investors get cut back tells me that this industry isn't as short of finance as they would like to convince themselves to believe. But the fundamentals around precious metals investments, as an example, I think continue very much intact. the big beautiful bill, uh, or that big bad budget buster, depending on your point of view, I think is symptomatic of the problems that face U.S. dollar hegemony, and hence very bullish for gold. I think 3 decades of underinvestment in natural resources, in productive capacity around natural resources, is very good for a whole variety of natural resource investments. I don't suspect that we're going to have a full-blown resource market until we decide whether or not we're going to have a recession, or in fact have that recession. I continue to believe that the near-term prospects of things like copper and nickel and oil, industrial materials, could easily be impacted by a global economic slowdown. I'm no economist. I don't know if we're going to have one. Uh, but it wouldn't surprise me if we had weaker markets in natural resources for a couple of years before we have stronger markets. Make no mistake, a few years out, uh, 3 decades of underinvestment in productive capacity is going to come home to roost. And we're going to have very, very, very strong natural resource markets. So I think in answer to the question, it depends on who you are. The
Okay.
moves that we've seen in the period 2024 to 2025 uh, in the companies that were at the Rural Symposium, the admittedly a fairly select group of juniors, those companies year on year were uniformly up 50%. Uh, Much of it had to do not so much with huge buying power, uh, but the absence of sellers. Uh, and, that one's over. So if you're a trader, be happy. Wait for another period of hate. If you're an investor, the analog to what we're in right now, I believe, is the decade of the 1970s. It's an extremely powerful analog. Familiarize yourself with the fact that during that decade, there was at least one period, 1975, where the price of natural resource stocks fell by half, half in 9 months. If you didn't have the courage of your convictions and you got shaken out, in terms of, as an example, the gold trade, you left a move from $100 an ounce to $850 an ounce out of your portfolio over 6 short years. So think about the answer to that question in the context of the analog of the decade of the 1970s. Study how that market played out for 10 years and plot to live your life accordingly. There will be volatility, there will be risk. But for people who understand the nature of the game and take risks that they can afford, this is going to be a very rewarding 10 years, and a 10 years where other aspects of investing might be substantially less pleasant.
To all my viewers and listeners here, Rick and I are going to be going through my list here, and my list of companies. We're going to be talking about the companies that were very appealing to me. I met most of these companies. I've talked to most of the CEOs, and I've already started doing my due diligence them. They were all at the 2025 Rick Rule Symposium, the Rule Symposium in Boca Raton. I am an investor in some, and when I will preface this with Rick, once I ask the company, I will let him know that I'm an investor or not. That all being said, last interview I told Rick some of these companies were up significantly at the conference. I would not chase. This is not a recommendation, but if any company's up after this talk, that is not my motivation. And I would suggest not chasing. Let stuff come to you and just really have this as a resource to start developing your lists so you can do your own due diligence. Rick, tell me before we get into the list of companies, tell me how if investors want to email you, how you review their portfolios and
Sure.
uh,
Any investor or speculator who cares what I think about natural resource stocks can personalize it. Go to ruralinvestmentmedia.com and list your natural resource stocks. Sidebar, no crypto, no pot stocks, no tech stocks, just natural resource stocks. I'll review them 1 to 10. Understand that these rankings are snapshots in time. Things can change very rapidly with news. And I'll comment on individual issues if I think my comments might have value. Remember that these are indicative, that circumstances change. One drill hole could make me look like a genius or make me look like a moron. So the fact that I said something nice about something in August doesn't mean I won't say something nasty about it in November. So understand that these are snapshots in time, but they are valuable snapshots in time. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in data acquisition and analysis, and it's all yours for free at ruleinvestmentmedia.com.
And I've taken advantage of that with you. So just to all my viewers and listeners, I strongly advise, I will say advise, take advantage of Rick and let him review your portfolio. So let's start out with my list. Again, this was compiled through the talks that I had and the meetings that I had at the conference. And number one I have is Concora Copper with Jeff Phillips. They were at the conference and I believe they presented. I was not at the presentation. Give me your thoughts